At 72, Margaret thought raising a child was behind her. Then her grandson, 6'5", 280 pounds, with the mind of a 5-year-old, became her responsibility, and the world wasn't ready for either of them. Margaret Henderson's alarm didn't go off that morning, October 17th, 2023. It didn't need to. At 72, her body was its own alarm clock, waking at 5:47 a.m. whether she wanted it to or not. The house in Willow Creek, Oregon, a small timber town nestled against the Cascade foothills, was still dark. She lay in bed, listening, always listening. From the room next door came the rhythmic sound of breathing, deep, steady. Devon was still asleep. Margaret exhaled slowly. A sleeping Devon meant a peaceful start to the day. A wakeful Devon before 6 a.m. meant chaos. Overturned furniture, shredded curtains, and neighbors pounding on the walls. She rose carefully, her knees protesting with their usual morning symphony of clicks and aches. 72 years of life, and the last 6 had aged her more than the previous 66 combined. She tiptoed down the hallway, avoiding the creaky floorboard outside Devon's door. Second plank from the left, she'd memorized it years ago. Through the crack in his door, she could see him. Devon Mitchell Henderson, 24 years old, 6 feet 5 inches of muscle and bone, 280 pounds of raw, uncontrolled strength, and the mind of a 5-year-old trapped inside that massive frame. His shoulders barely fit through door frames. His hands could crush a soda can without effort. But in sleep, curled in a fetal position with his worn stuffed bear, Mr. Buttons, the only toy his mother had left behind, he looked like what he really was, a frightened child in a giant's body. Margaret's eyes drifted to the windows, all locked, the handles removed and stored in her closet. She'd learned that lesson the hard way 3 years ago when Devon, fascinated by a bird on the ledge, had pushed out the screen and nearly tumbled out. Critical safety. Tip 1. For caregivers of individuals with developmental disabilities, window security is non-negotiable. Standard locks aren't enough. Remove operating handles entirely, or install windows that only open from the top. A moment of distraction can turn fatal when your loved one doesn't understand the concept of a 3-story fall. Margaret remembered the day Devon's parents, her son Marcus and his wife Sheila, had shown up at her door 6 years ago. Devon had been 18 then, already towering over his father, already impossible for them to control. "Mom, we can't do this anymore," Marcus had said, not meeting her eyes. "He broke Sheila's wrist. He didn't mean to, but he doesn't know his own strength. We found a group home that specializes in—" "No!" Margaret's voice had been steel. "He's not going to some institution where they'll drug him into a zombie and lock him in a room." "Mom, be reasonable. You're 66 years old. You can't—" I said no. And that had been the end of it. Marcus and Sheila had left that day. They sent money every month, guilt money, Margaret called it, but they never visited, never called. Devon's own parents had erased him from their lives like a mistake they wanted to forget. Margaret had made a vow that day, standing in her doorway with Devon's confused face peering over her shoulder. "My blood will never rot in an institution, not while I'm breathing." But breathing was getting harder, and Devon was getting bigger. She started the coffee maker. The sound could wake Devon, but the smell usually kept him calm. While it brewed, she prepared his medication: 2 antipsychotics, 1 mood stabilizer, 1 for seizures. The pills that kept the storm inside him from becoming a hurricane. The trick was getting him to take them. Devon hated pills, hated the way they tasted, the way they felt going down. Margaret had learned to crush them into applesauce or honey, mask the bitterness with something sweet. She heard movement from his room. Footsteps, heavy, shaking the floorboards. The door creaked open. Devon emerged, his hair sticking up in wild directions, his eyes unfocused with sleep. He wore the same outfit he always wore, sweatpants with an elastic waist, no buttons, no zippers, fine motor skills were beyond him, and a soft cotton t-shirt, nothing scratchy, nothing with tags. Critical safety. Tip, Murdu. Clothing choices matter. Buttons, zippers, and laces can become sources of frustration and meltdown triggers for individuals with autism or developmental delays. Elastic waistbands, slip-on shoes with Velcro, and tagless clothing reduce daily battles and maintain independence. "Morning, honey," Margaret said softly, keeping her voice low and melodic. Sudden loud sounds could startle Devon, and a startled Devon was a dangerous Devon. Devon made a sound, not words. He rarely used words. A kind of humming acknowledgement. He lumbered to the kitchen table and sat down, the chair groaning under his weight. Breakfast was a ritual. Scrambled eggs, soft, not runny, never runny. Toast cut into triangles, always triangles, and orange juice, in the blue cup, never the red cup. Deviation from the routine meant a meltdown, and meltdowns with Devon meant broken dishes, holes in walls, and sometimes bruises on Margaret's arms when she tried to calm him. She set the plate in front of him, the medication hidden in a spoonful of honey spread on the toast. Devon sniffed it suspiciously. His sense of smell was extraordinary. He could detect the slightest chemical scent. But this morning, the honey masked it well enough. He ate. Margaret watched, her own breakfast forgotten, making sure he swallowed the toast, didn't spit it out. The morning passed without incident. Devon played with his wooden blocks. He could spend hours stacking and restacking them, lost in a world Margaret couldn't access. She did laundry, paid bills, and tried not to think about the dwindling balance in her checking account. By noon, they were out of food. The refrigerator held only condiments, and a half-gallon of milk past its prime. Margaret's monthly Social Security check was gone, most of it to Devon's medications, the rest to utilities. The guilt money from Marcus was late this month. She had to go to the farmer's market. It was Saturday, and the vendors marked down their produce at the end of the day. But taking Devon out in public was like taking a lion on a leash, possible but terrifying. "Devon," she said gently, approaching him as he stacked his blocks, "we need to go to the market. Get some food. You can come with me." Devon looked up, his face brightening. He loved the market. The colors, the smells, the bustle. But he also got overwhelmed by it, overstimulated by the sensory flood. Margaret helped him into his shoes, large Velcro-strapped sneakers, size 17. She put on his jacket, a heavy canvas work coat that could withstand his tendency to grab and pull at things. And most importantly, she clipped a laminated card to his jacket zipper. "My name is Devon. I have autism and cannot speak. If I am lost or in distress, please call 541-555-847. Thank you for your patience and understanding." Critical safety. Tip 3. ID cards are essential. In moments of crisis, your loved one cannot advocate for themselves. A visible ID with medical information and emergency contacts can prevent tragic misunderstandings with police or strangers. "Hold my hand," Margaret instructed, offering her small, wrinkled hand to Devon's massive paw. "Do not let go. Remember?" Devon nodded, his face serious. He understood this rule. Hand-holding meant safety. They walked the 6 blocks to the farmer's market on Main Street. Willow Creek was small enough that everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew Devon. Or rather, everyone knew to stay away from Devon. As they walked, people crossed to the other side of the street. Parents pulled their children closer. Car doors locked as they passed. Margaret felt each small rejection like a needle in her heart. But she kept her face neutral. Devon noticed fear. It confused him, frightened him. At the market, the smells hit first. Fresh bread from the German bakery, roasted coffee, ripe tomatoes, cut flowers. Devon's nose twitched. His breathing quickened slightly, a sign he was processing too much sensory information at once. "It's okay," Margaret murmured. "We'll be quick." But as they reached the first vendor, a produce stand run by Frank Weber, a surly man in his 50s who'd never had a kind word for anyone, Margaret knew quick wasn't going to happen. The stand was crowded. People jostled for position, grabbing at the discounted vegetables. Devon froze. Crowds meant touching, and Devon hated being touched by strangers. It felt like needles on his skin, a violation of his body that he couldn't articulate but couldn't tolerate. "Excuse me," Margaret said, trying to navigate through the crowd. "Excuse me, please." No one moved. Devon's grip on her hand tightened. Too tight. Margaret winced but didn't pull away. They reached the front of the stand. Margaret began selecting potatoes, checking each one for rot spots. Money was too tight to waste on bad produce. "Hey," Frank barked. "No picking through. You take what you get, or you leave." Margaret looked up, startled. "I'm just checking for... I know what you're doing. You're trying to cherry-pick the good ones and leave me with garbage. Buy the bag as is, or move along." Margaret felt her face flush. "Mr. Weber, I only have $15 to feed us for the week. I can't afford to buy rotten." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before taking on, Frank's eyes flicked to Devon, his lip curling in disgust. "A burden you can't afford." The word hung in the air like poison. Burden. Devon didn't understand the word itself, but he understood tone. He understood his grandmother's face crumpling, her shoulders sagging. In Devon's world, that meant threat. That meant danger to the person who fed him, held him, loved him. Margaret reached for Frank's arm, trying to placate him. "Please, I'm just trying to..." Frank jerked his arm away. "Don't touch me." His hand swung outward in an exaggerated gesture of revulsion, and though he didn't intend to make contact, his knuckles brushed against Margaret's cheek. Time stopped. Devon saw it, processed it, interpreted it the only way his mind could. Attack. Harm. Grandmother in danger. The sound that came from Devon wasn't human. It was a roar, deep and primal, the sound of a creature whose family was threatened. He released Margaret's hand, the first rule broken, and lunged. But what happened next wasn't what the crowd expected. Devon didn't attack Frank. Instead, he positioned himself between the vendor and his grandmother, arms spread wide, making himself a wall of flesh and bone. He didn't hit, didn't strike. He simply stood there, all 280 pounds of him, blocking any path to Margaret. His face was terrifying, twisted in rage, tears streaming down his cheeks, but his hands never balled into fists. He was doing what he'd been taught in his therapy sessions years ago. When scared, make yourself big. Make yourself a shield. Frank stumbled backward, crashing into his own produce display. Apples rolled across the ground. The crowd gasped, scattered. "He's attacking! Call the police!" someone screamed. "He's going to kill someone!" another voice added. Within minutes, the crowd had transformed into a mob. Several men advanced on Devon with vendors' wooden crates raised like weapons. Devon didn't move. He stood frozen, his arms still spread, protecting his grandmother, but his eyes showed pure terror. He didn't understand why people were angry. He'd protected his grandmother. He'd been good. "Stop!" Margaret's voice cut through the chaos, surprisingly strong for such a small woman. She pushed her way in, front of Devon, her 4'11" frame dwarfed by his massive body. "Stop! Don't touch him! He's autistic! He didn't attack anyone!" "He lunged at Frank," someone shouted. "He scared my kid!" "He's dangerous!" Margaret spread her own arms, mimicking Devon's protective stance. "He's not dangerous. He's scared. Please, just back away." Sirens wailed in the distance. The Willow Creek Police Department was 2 blocks away. They'd be here in seconds. Critical safety. Tip number 4. In public confrontations involving individuals with autism or developmental disabilities, do not engage in physical restraint unless absolutely necessary. Verbal de-escalation, clear, simple commands, and creating physical distance are far more effective. Restraint can trigger violent panic responses, turning a manageable situation into a tragedy. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt at the market's edge. 4 officers emerged, hands on their service weapons but not yet drawn. "Step away from the man," the lead officer commanded. "No!" Margaret stood firm. "Don't approach him aggressively. He has severe autism. He doesn't understand commands." The lead officer, a veteran named Sergeant Mills, who'd been on the force for 20 years, held up a hand to stop his younger officers. He recognized Margaret. More importantly, he recognized Devon. He'd been called to their home twice before on neighbor complaints. "Mrs. Henderson," Mills said carefully, keeping his distance. "What happened here?" "Mr. Weber shoved me, accidentally, I'm sure, and Devon thought I was being attacked. He was protecting me. He didn't hit anyone. Look at Frank, not a scratch on him." Frank Weber, still sitting on the ground amid his scattered produce, looked sheepish now that the adrenaline was fading. I didn't actually get hurt. He didn't hit me, just scared the hell out of me." Sergeant Mills approached slowly, making eye contact with Margaret, not Devon. "Can you calm him down, ma'am?" Margaret turned to Devon. His face was still contorted, still crying, but when she touched his arm, he looked down at her. From her pocket, she pulled out a small stuffed bear, a miniature version of Mr. Buttons. This was Devon's emergency comfort object, something familiar to ground him when the world became too much. "Devon," she said softly, holding up the tiny bear. "Look, it's little Mr. Buttons. We're okay. Game over. Time to go home." Devon's face slowly relaxed. He took the bear, pressed it to his face, inhaled its familiar scent. His arms lowered, his breathing slowed. Within minutes, the terrifying giant had transformed back into a confused, frightened young man. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Some faces showed understanding. Most showed discomfort, the desire to be anywhere else. Sergeant Mills approached Margaret. "I'm not going to arrest anyone today. But Mrs. Henderson, you need help. You can't keep doing this alone." "I'm fine," Margaret said automatically, but her voice shook. "No, ma'am. With respect, you're not." Mills lowered his voice so only she could hear. "What happens when you fall and break a hip? What happens when you have a heart attack? Who takes care of Devon then?" The question Margaret had been avoiding for 6 years. The question that kept her awake at night. "I'm working on it," she lied. Mills handed her a card. "This is my wife's number. She's a social worker. There are programs. respite care, in-home support services, adult day programs. Let her help you. Margaret took the card, knowing she probably wouldn't call. Pride, stubbornness, fear that accepting help meant admitting defeat. They walked home in silence. Devon held her hand again, his grip gentle now, almost apologetic. People still stared, but Margaret was too tired to care. Harmful behavior warning. Isolation is a caregiver's worst enemy. Pride and fear of judgment keep many caregivers from seeking help until it's too late. Accept that you cannot do everything alone. Reaching out for support isn't failure, it's survival. Without help, both you and your loved one are at risk. Back home, Devon went straight to his room and crawled under his bed, his safe space when the world was too much. Margaret made tea with shaking hands and sat at the kitchen table, staring at Sergeant Mills's wife's card. That night, after Devon was asleep, Margaret sat at her old desk and pulled out a notebook. On the first page, she began to write, "Emergency plan for Devon. If something happens to me, 1. Do not call 911 immediately. Devon will panic at sirens and uniforms. 2. Call Sergeant Mills, first, 541-555-0192. 3. Devon's medication list is in the top kitchen drawer. 4. His comfort objects, Mr. Buttons, large bear in his room, little Mr. Buttons in my purse. 5. He communicates through gestures and sounds. He understands more than he can express. 6. His triggers, loud sudden noises, crowds, being touched without warning, changes in routine. 7. His safe space, under his bed. 8. Never, ever restrain him unless he's in immediate danger. It terrifies him. 9. He is not violent. He is protective. There's a difference. 10. He deserves love, patience, and dignity. Please give him all 3. Margaret's hand trembled as she wrote. This wasn't a plan. This was a will. A last testament to the boy man she'd sworn to protect. Critical safety. Tip 5. Every caregiver must have a crisis plan in writing. Include emergency contacts, medical information, behavioral triggers, and de-escalation techniques. Keep copies with trusted neighbors, doctors, and local police. In an emergency, those few pieces of paper can save your loved one's life. The weeks following the market incident were difficult. Some neighbors avoided them entirely. Others, surprisingly, reached out. Mrs. Chen from next door brought over a casserole and asked if Devon might like to help her water her garden. He was gentle with the flowers, she'd noticed. Young Pastor Mike from the Methodist Church called and offered to visit, said he'd worked with special needs adults before. Devon tolerated his presence, even seemed to enjoy the man's soft voice reading children's books aloud. And Margaret, swallowing her pride, finally called the number on Sergeant Mills's card. Sarah Mills, the social worker, visited the following Tuesday. She didn't judge, didn't pity. She simply assessed. You're doing an incredible job, Mrs. Henderson, Sarah said gently. But you're also burning out. I can see it. I'm fine, Margaret insisted, but Sarah shook her head. Caregiver burnout is real and it's dangerous. You're 72. You're caring for an adult who requires constant supervision. You have no breaks, no support system. That's not sustainable. So what do you suggest? Stick him in a group home where they'll drug him up and forget about him? Margaret's voice was bitter. No. I suggest we get you help so you can keep him here, safely, without destroying yourself in the process. Over the next hour, Sarah explained the options. Adult Protective Services could provide in-home care a few hours a day. Medicaid programs could cover adaptive equipment, a stronger bed frame, safety locks, even renovations to make the home safer. Adult day programs could give Devon socialization and activities while giving Margaret time to rest, see her doctor, live her own life for a few hours. "I can't afford," Margaret began. "You don't have to. These programs are income-based. You likely qualify for everything." Sarah leaned forward. "Mrs. Henderson, accepting help isn't giving up. It's choosing to survive so you can keep fighting for him." That night, Margaret looked at Devon, who was arranging his blocks in careful towers, humming tunelessly to himself. "What do you think, honey?" she asked, knowing he couldn't answer. "Should we let some people help us?" Devon looked up, his face breaking into that rare, beautiful smile that made all the hard days worth it. Margaret took that as a yes. 3 months later, life looked different. A caregiver named Marcus, no relation to her son, which felt like cosmic irony, came 3 mornings a week, allowing Margaret to attend her own doctor appointments, meet with friends, and remember she was human. Devon attended an adult day program twice a week, where he did art therapy, music sessions, and socialization with other adults with special needs. He came home happy, tired, and calm. The house had been updated with reinforced door locks, grab bars in the bathroom, and a hospital-grade bed that could support Devon's weight without collapsing. Was it perfect? No. There were still hard days. Days when Devon melted down over a wrong cup color. Days when Margaret's body ached so badly she could barely move. Days when she wondered if she'd made the right choice. But there were also good days. Days when Devon laughed at a bird outside the window. Days when he hugged her, gentle and sweet. Days when she realized that in saving him, he'd also saved her from a lonely old age. One Saturday, Margaret took Devon back to the farmer's market. She'd been avoiding it, but Sarah had encouraged her not to let fear win. Frank Weber saw them coming. Margaret braced for hostility. Instead, Frank approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "Mrs. Henderson," he said awkwardly, I wanted to apologize for what I said, how I acted." Margaret was speechless. "My sister has a kid with Down syndrome," Frank continued. "I should have known better. I was having a bad day, took it out on you both. I'm sorry." Devon watched the exchange, confused, but sensing the change in tone. "Apology accepted," Margaret said quietly. Frank pulled out an apple from his stand, shiny and red. He held it out to Devon, not getting too close, respecting the space. Devon looked at Margaret. She nodded. Devon carefully took the apple, examined it, then smiled. "Thank you," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "No," Frank replied. "Thank you for not giving up on him." As they walked home that day, Devon munching his apple, Margaret thought about Sergeant Mills's question. What happens when you're gone? She still didn't have a perfect answer, but she had a plan. She had support. She had people who finally understood, and most importantly, she had time. Time she wouldn't have had if she kept trying to do everything alone. That evening, as Devon arranged his blocks one more time before bed, Margaret updated her emergency notebook. But now it included new names, new numbers, new resources. It wasn't just a goodbye letter anymore. It was a survival guide for both of them. Final critical advice for caregivers. Do. Create written emergency plans with medical info, triggers, and de-escalation techniques. Accept help from community resources, social services, and support groups. Prioritize your own health. You cannot care for others if you collapse. Educate your community about your loved one's condition. Celebrate small victories. They matter more than you think. Join caregiver support groups. You're not alone in this struggle. Don't isolate yourself out of pride or fear of judgment. Ignore your own medical needs. Feel guilty for needing breaks. Respite care is essential, not selfish. Allow your loved one to become your only identity. Assume the world will automatically understand. Education and advocacy are constant. Give up hope when days are hard. Tomorrow may be better. Margaret Henderson kept her vow. Devon never went to an institution. But she learned that keeping that vow didn't mean doing it alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. And sometimes love means accepting you can't carry the weight of the world by yourself. But you don't have to. Because when you open your hands and ask for support, you often find that the world has been waiting to help carry the burden all along.